Hey everyone, I am Giselle Ragoonanan and I am part of the Trinidad and Tobago Bird Observatory and Research Center. Today we're going to talk a bit about bird banding and molt monitoring in Trinidad and Tobago. But before we jump right into the presentation, I hope that we are all braving the best of this weather right now. And if anyone has been affected by flooding, I hope that you're getting access to the resources and the help that you need to make it through this. So, without further ado, let's jump into the presentation. So, the Trinidad and Tobago Bird Observatory was officially a registered not-for-profit organization and was founded in 2023 by Davika Budram and myself, Giselle, for the purpose of monitoring and studying resident and migratory birds and their habitats in an effort to promote the conservation of ecosystems, to tackle current conservation challenges, raise awareness, and to implement conservation management plans across Trinidad and Tobago for a future for people and planet. And this is our very small team. From left to right, we have Shay Ragoonanan, our banding program manager. We have Cassiana McKenna and Davina Duke, who are both volunteer field assistants. Davika Budram, our founder. Kelson Kirk, another volunteer field assistant. Myself, Giselle, and Shivam Mahadev, who is our chairman. So TTBO is really part of a broader network. We collaborate with the Klamath Bird Observatory, which is our sister organization based out in Ashland, Oregon. And at Klamath Bird Observatory was where Davika, myself, and Shay would have all been certified as North American Banding Council bird banders. Our working partner is the Birds Caribbean team, so we are working partners with the Birds Caribbean team, and we collaborate with the Corner Lab of Ornithology and the Environment for the Americas on education and outreach initiatives. And we also collaborate with the Trinidad and Tobago Field Naturalist Club on a local environmental education initiative here in Trinidad. So TTBO conducts avian research, conservation, and education across Trinidad and Tobago. We operate constant effort banding stations on both islands, and our work informs species management, public awareness, and regional collaboration. We also follow a very tight ship banding code of ethics, which aligns and reflects the North American Banding Council, where we ensure the respect, safety, and welfare of birds and their population, people, and the environment. So bird safety is our top priority. We design and use appropriate studies, methods, and analysis to advance a valid scientific purpose. We are accountable and strive for high standards always. We are never beyond reproach and are always looking for ways to improve and obtain all necessary permits and permissions. So why do we ban birds? Bird banding is a globally respected method. It is one of the safest capture methods that is in science for tagging birds. We ban birds to look at dispersal and migration. So for example, the MOTUS program, which is part or sister program to the MAPS program, and MAPS stands for Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survivorship, which is a program by the Institute for Bird Populations, where they monitor the productivity and survivors of their passerines or songbirds in North America. After those birds leave North America for migration and they come down to the Caribbean and South America, the MOTUS program kicks in, where we monitor them during their overwintering period here on the islands, in the Caribbean or in South America if they get all the way down there. We look for behavior and social structure. We look at lifespan, population trends. We can estimate survival and productivity for resident birds. You can also look at toxicology and disease research, habitat quality assessment, and phenology. When do birds breed? When do they molt? All of this is very relevant and necessary data. Our banding station and target species. So on Tobago, we have 4 banding stations, 3 that are along the main ridge, Niplig Trail, Blue Copper Trail, and Gilpin Trail, and 1 on the highest peak or Pigeon Peak on Tobago. On Trinidad, we have two stations, one in Brasso Seco and one on Montserrat Cocoa Estate, which is in Grand Couva. Our target species are passerine birds or land birds. We do sometimes get migratory seabirds, such as sandpipers, that would fall into the net if we're banding somewhere close by water sources during the motas or migratory period. And that would mean like places such as the Caroni Swamp or wetlands that we go to set up for banding during motas period. So some field findings and emerging questions. We have some scientific discoveries and open hypotheses. And of course, this is where data leads to more inquiry. The VICA has been studying the white-tailed saberwing on Tobago for a very long time. However, the white-tailed saberwing is now part of the BioReach program, or project, that is part or in part with the Tobago House of Assembly. And 3 members of TTBO is assigned to that project as individuals. The VICA is assigned to the project for the banding and for the education and outreach. She has then assigned Kelson and Cassiana to be part of the education and outreach of the BioReach project, and only the VICA can speak to the white-tailed saberwing here. For the mannequins, we are observing delayed plumage maturation in males and the molt phenology. So mannequins take 3 to 4 years to get to that adult or definitive plumage, and we're kind of looking at the in-betweens. For the honey creepers, we hypothesize a pre-alternate molt, which is currently under investigation, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. Banding permits. We are required to request permission from the Forestry Department of Trinidad and Tobago, who gives us the permit. Some special permits may be needed for working with endangered species or for working in national parks and for taking additional samples such as blood or feather samples. And of course, if you're banding through a university, you must get university approval. So let's talk a bit about proper holds. So in the first picture to your left, you see that is the bander's grip, where the head is between the pointer and the middle finger, and the back of the bird then rests on the palm of the hand, which means that the bird cannot toss up and reduces the risk of wing strain. We do have the option to spin the bird and place the tibia tarsus between the ring and the pinky finger, which then gives us a bit more control over the bird's leg so the bird is not kicking, which then again reduces the chance of the bird getting a fractured or broken leg. We also use the photographer's grip, which is needed when we need to take photographs of the bird. We take our fingernails against the body with the pointer and middle finger, sandwiching the upper joint of the leg between the tibia tarsus between these two fingers, and then we place our thumb on the joint of the bird's leg or the tibia tarsus, and we maintain one hand close in case the bird starts to flap its wings. And of course, not all species can be put in the photographer's grip, right? So species like the kingfishers, hummingbirds, trogons, all swifts and doves cannot be put in photographer's grip simply because they have a very short tibia tarsus, and if they move or flap their wings, we can cause some strain or a broken tarsus. So using molt as a research tool. Firstly, feather replacement and patterns aid in age classification. So we can use molt as an actual research tool for aging birds accurately. Molt patterns help us to assign birds to age class, and this is critical for understanding population dynamics. For example, how many young versus adult birds are in a habitat. We can understand life history strategies. So birds will typically undergo a molt at a predictable stage of their life, after breeding, before migration, etc. And by studying them when and how molt happens, we can link the feather replacement to reproductive cycles, migration timing, and even survival trade-offs. This can also help us to reveal migration strategies. Some birds do a molt before breeding, which helps them to change or aids in changing to brighter plumage, which then attracts a bird, especially migratory species, to attract a mate, sorry. And this is especially predominant in migratory species. Observing this can help us to indicate how far a bird may travel or if it breeds locally. It helps us to detect environmental or nutritional stress. So feather quality, for example, fault bars, can indicate past stresses or food shortages. And this can also be delayed or disrupted by illness, poor habitat, or by climatic events. Molt also helps us to enhance species ID and demographic monitoring. So molt limits, which is basically a transition between old and new feathers, helps to distinguish formative versus adult plumage, even when the coloration is similar. And this improves data accuracy for long-term studies, because birds in the past that have or do undergo pre-alternate molts have been described as entirely new species, and this helps us to determine the different states of molt and describe them thoroughly. So basically, molt is a bird's biological signature, and it allows us to help read the first few months of a bird's life through its feathers. So in order for us to understand molt, we need to understand the structure or the anatomy of a bird's feather. So first we have the hollow or the shaft, which is the middle of the feather, where then attaches the downy barbs or the downy feathers. You go up to the after feather, then you go to the vein, the rachis, and your barbs and your barbules. So you have your barbs, which are the actual, what looks like the actual veins or the feathers, and then barbules hook between that, where then you have hooklets onto those barbules. So it is quite a complex structure, and here you can see it a bit better. So in summary, although the feather growing structure or the follicle is a hollow cylinder of tissue, the keratin growing cells are actually distributed in strips within the cylinder. So if you look at it, you'll see the relative timing of the formation, the earlier versus the later, the earlier meaning the the downy barbs or the downy feathers, which then grows up to your barbs and barbules. Yeah. And this here is just a bit of feather terminology or bird topography, and this helps with species identification. So if you know this, you know the back, the scapulars, the subauricular stripe, the bird has a lower, it has a forehead, what color is the forehead, what color is the throat. So this just helps us with species ID. And the underside of the wing showing us the carpometacarpus, the ulna, the radius. So it just shows us the different parts of the bird's wing and where these feathers are attached. This life cycle phenology of birds really is reflective of North American birds. Generally, ornithologists recognize 4 repeatable phases of the avian life cycle, which is breeding, molting, migration, and wintering. But this only can speak to birds that occur in temperate regions. Here, in the Caribbean and South America, our birds do not follow this life cycle phenology, and hence the reason why more banding is needed so that we can make our own life cycle charts. So what is molt? Molt is the regular and orderly growth of feathers by which a plumage is acquired. Again, it is the regular and orderly growth of feathers by which a plumage is acquired. So a bird molts and then they acquire a plumage. What is not molt is an accidental molt or a fright molt, where sometimes something might grab it, or it might bolt away in fright. They would shed feathers or release feathers. That is not molt. That is called adventitious molt or accidental molt. It is usually an orderly growth of feathers starting from the body and going out into the wings or the flight feathers. So why do birds molt? Birds molt because their feathers wear out, and feathers are essential for flight, for installation, and for communication. So birds replace their old or damaged feathers for new ones in a controlled and often strategic process. It is not often always strategic, only sometimes here in the Caribbean. So one reason that birds molt is for feather wear and tear. The feathers degrade over time due to UV exposure, wind, rain, dust, and physical activity, so just basic environmental conditions. And of course, unlike skin, feathers cannot repair themselves, so they must be replaced. Birds also molt because of insulation and thermoregulation. Feathers are essential for keeping them warm in cool climates and cool in hot climates. So molting ensures to keep the integrity of those feathers for insulation. Flight efficiency. Worn flight feathers obviously reduce aerodynamic performance, so they must replace their feathers to increase their aerodynamic performance. And they typically replace those feathers in a staggered sequence. So it is not going to be all the feathers at the same time. It is usually one or two at a time, and this is all based on their own behavioral dynamics, where they need to feed, how far they need to fly, because they need to maintain a balance. They molt for breeding displays and social signals. So some birds undergo a pre-alternate molt, which has been linked to develop a brighter or more distinctive plumage. This is not directly linked to the breeding season, but more so to a migratory journey because of the long distance that birds need to travel back to North America in order to breed. They usually do what is called a pre-alternate molt, or a gradual refreshing of their feathers here, or wherever they stop for their non-breeding period, and it links or corresponds with the breeding period, hence the reason they've aligned it as a breeding molt. It is not necessarily a breeding molt. However, these feathers do play quite a great role in courtship, territory defense, and species recognition. And for seasonal and life cycle adaptations, molt is timed to avoid different high energy demands such as breeding. This also we need to have more data here to confirm or deny this, because we have observed and captured euphonias and banana quits that we found both breeding and molting at the same time. We found males with cloacas, very swollen cloacas that were in a present molt, and we found females with brood patches that were in a present molt. So more banding data is needed. So we're going to talk now a bit about the molt strategies. And we have 4 very clearly defined molt strategies. The first one being the simple basic strategy, and this pattern is relatively uncommon, primarily found in very, very large, long-lived seabirds, such as albatrosses or raptors that have relatively few predators. These species have a long fledging or nesting stage, during which the young one grows the juvenile plumage or the first basic plumage. The next one is known as the complex basic strategy. So we first have the simple basic, now we have the complex basic strategy, and this really aids juvenile with low quality plumage to leave the nest. So juvenile birds who fledge after 14 days, which is like the duration of time that birds take to fledge the nest, sometimes before, they grow those feathers really quickly. So those feathers are very fragile, and it's not going to last very long. So they have an extra inserted molt between the first cycle and the second cycle, or the first pre-basic, which results in a basic plumage, and the second basic. And that in between molt is called a formative molt. And the formative molt is basically a replacement of feathers within the first year, so the bird can survive until they get to the second basic. This is mainly found in smaller land birds, or passerine birds, I would say, from hawks to small falcons, kingfishers to woodpeckers, and many, many passerines. And then we have the simple alternate strategy, which is relatively large non-aquatic passerines, such as loons, some pelicans, some sea ducks, and some large seagulls. And then we have the complex alternate strategies, which may include many shorebirds, Little gulls, such as the Franklin's gull and some passerine birds, also have a complex alternate strategy. So the more extent pre-alternate molt is somehow quantified by the longer migration distance. So for example, warblers display a complex alternate strategy. So we have extent of molts. We have molt strategies, and then we have extent of that molt strategy. And the extent of the molt strategy speaks to the extent of the feather replacement. So an absent molt means no feathers are replaced. Limited means limited to body feathers. Partial is limited to some body feathers and maybe some coverts and some flight feathers, which also might include some secondaries. An incomplete molt includes body feathers and some flight feathers, which also includes primary flight feathers. And then a complete molt includes everything. You've done a complete molt. Yeah, so this basically just speaks to the extent of the feather replacement. So here you see your flight feathers versus your body feathers. Body feathers would be your body, the body, bird's body, the wing coverts, which is the lesser, medium, and greater coverts, and the tail coverts. And then your flight feathers includes the primaries, primary coverts, your secondary flight feathers, your tertials, and your retroces, which is the tail feathers. So the extent, which is what we just discussed. Absent, no feathers, no body, no flight. Limited, some body feathers. Partial, most to all body feathers. Incomplete, most to all body feathers and some flight feathers, and complete is all feathers. Now, we discussed molt limits. The extent of the molt that gives us a molt limit includes the limited, partial, and incomplete. The limited molt extent replaces some body feathers, which means that we would have the bird retaining older body feathers, which would give us a molt limit. A partial, which includes most to all body feathers, would also give us a molt limit. An incomplete, most to all body feathers and sub-flight feathers, which will also have 2 generations of feathers on the bird, gives us a molt limit. Yeah? So a molt limit is basically the limit between a retained and a replaced feather resulting from limited, partial, and incomplete molts. And so molt limits are found in plumages with different generations of feathers. So a molt limit is basically 2 or more generations of feathers that is present on a bird. And here you can see to the left, I have a formative bard and shrike, where you can see the male. This is a formative male with a molt limit. So this is between juvenile and formative plumage. He has brown juvenile flight feathers with some formative coverts, which have been changed during his formative molt. And then to the right, I have a banana quit that gave me an incomplete preformative molt that has 2 generations of feathers, which include some juvenile flight feathers and some formative flight feathers as well. So this was an incomplete molt where there's a gap of 2 generations of feathers that tells me what type of molt this bird has undergone. So how do we age birds? The WRP system, or Wolf Rider Pile system, is a universal system of 3 letters. North American birds were previously aged using the generalized nomenclature of the Humphrey Park system, hatch year after hatch year, but this doesn't speak to or is not relevant to birds in the Caribbean and South America, or the global South in general, simply because our birds don't follow that life cycle. We don't follow the strict cycle of 4 seasons in the North American continent or in temperate regions. Our birds here breed and molt opportunistically, so it's very difficult to assign them to an actual calendar year system when they're just doing things out of whack, or on their own timing, I would say rather. So Jared Wolf created a WRP, so Wolf Rider and Pyle came up with a universal system of 3 letters, And this helps us to age birds based on the molt cycle. So is the bird molting? Is it in its first, second, third, or definitive cycle? Is the bird molting or not? So is it in a cycle or is it currently actively in molt? And what type of plumage would be the result of this molt? Is it a juvenile plumage, a formative plumage, a supplemental, basic, or alternate? And so this is just a preview of the actual paper that came out using the molts to categorize the age of tropical birds. This can be found on the Journal of Field Ornithology, and it was written by Jared Wolf, Thomas Ryder, and Peter Pyle. And there's also another paper on the modifications to a molt-based aging system proposed by Wolf et al. In 2010. You can find that on the Journal of Field Ornithology and review the systems that was proposed for aging birds using this universal WRP system. So the universal WRP system goes like this. We have a molt cycle, a molt, and a plumage. So for example, the first position would be to determine whether that bird, what cycle this bird is in. Is it in an unknown cycle? Do we not know based on the plumage characteristics of this bird which cycle is it? Is it in a definitive cycle? So do we definitely know that this bird is an adult bird? Is it in its first cycle, second cycle, third cycle, fourth or more? And we can tell this based on the feather quality, the look of the feather, the barbs, how thick the barb is, how sparse it is, the color of the feather, many very different things that we were taught to look for. The second position is us looking at the definition of this molt. So is this bird in active molt? Is this bird actively molting? We do a series of collect a series of data which includes us blowing on the bird. So we blow to look for pin feathers emerging, and that will tell us if the bird is in active molt or if the bird is in a cycle. If the bird is not molting, that means it's in a current cycle. And the third position that we're looking for is the definition of this molt. What is the result of this molt? Is it going to be a juvenile molt? So is this bird molting into its juvenile plumage? Is this bird in a formative molt, and will this be a formative plumage? And so forth. Basic, alternate, supplemental, and we continue to go. So the WRP letters, 3 questions to clarify. 1, which cycle? First cycle, second cycle, definitive, third, fourth, unknown, etc. Is there active molt? Yes, we use the letter P for plumage or pre, and no, we use the letter C for cycle. So F, bird is in active molt, P, and what is the result of the plumage? J. So FPJ, first pre-juvenile. FCJ, first cycle juvenile. The bird is not in active molt. And so which plumage will give us the results of which plumage the bird is going into. To clarify, M, we could use the modifiers M to say if we are not sure, this bird is a minimum first pre-juvenile, a minimum first cycle alternate. H would be hatch year or juvenile characteristics, and A is after hatching year or adult characteristics. And this can just help us to add extra notes if we're seeing something. So during the pre-juvenile molt, all feathers grow simultaneously. Young birds are often readily distinguishable by the presence of juvenile plumage, and this distinguishes the soft part characteristics on unossified skull. So we can age birds using juvenile plumage, distinguishing soft part characteristics on unossified skull. Feather quality, size, shape, barbule, structure, rachis, color, wear, growth bars, fault bars, molt limits, all of these also helps us to distinguish what cycle this bird might be in and helps us to age this bird. And in addition to juvenile plumage, we can also look at bill color, eye color, the lining of the mouth, and all of this provides additional information to separate by age class. And although all of this information is useful, certain characteristics such as the eye color, the color of the lining of the mouth, the bill color, all of these are highly ambiguous and variable within and across species. So for the banding operations, we really rely on skull ossification to help us differentiate the age class of birds and striations on hummingbirds. So we're looking at the length of the hummingbird's bill and if there are any striations to help us to determine if this hummingbird, the age of the hummingbird. So skull pneumatization and ossification. What is skull ossification? So ossification really refers to the process by which a bird's cartilage or soft skull gradually turns into a hard bony tissue. So young birds, especially hatchlings and fledglings, much like young babies, have a very soft skull. For birds, they have a soft translucent skull, and as they age, the bone layer or the second bony layer develops beneath the first one. And so these layers are connected by what they call tiny struts, which make the skull stronger and more solid. And skull pneumatization is the formation of the air-filled spaces or the cavities within the skull bones. In adults, these air pockets reduce skull weight, which is an adaptation for flight. And the pneumatization is a late-stage process. So in skull development, it usually follows the ossification process. And as the skull becomes pneumatized, it becomes less translucent and more opaque under light. So this helps us to determine the age of the bird and or what stage of skull pneumatization or ossification the bird might be in. This is a very generic chart that helps us while we're looking at the birds in the hand. So how do we know the sex of the bird, of a bird, sorry? There are three ways that we can, or three techniques. One, sexually dimorphic birds with plumage. Sexually monomorphic birds, we use CP-BP, which is cloacal protuberance or brood patch. And for sexually polymorphic birds, again, we can use plumage. So in sexually dimorphic birds, males are one plumage characteristic, females are another. In monomorphic birds, they are all the same plumage, and in polymorphic birds, they have three different plumage stages. So males have one plumage, females have a plumage differentiation, and then juveniles have characteristics of juvenile plumage, either wearing a male or female. And so when we look at CP-BP, CP stands for cloacal protuberance. This is used to identify male birds, which is common during the breeding season, and the male seminal vessels fill with sperm, so it enlarges. And then the brood patch is used to identify females. Female brood patches are common during the breeding season when the abdomen shed and the vascularization occurs. The liquid that is amidst to transfer heat to the eggs for being incubated. So you practically see that process on the bird's belly when the vascularization or the liquid is filled up, and that liquid is a mass to transfer heat to the eggs for incubation. So we have the case of the honey creepers. We have been observing and banding honey creepers. So far we've banded 19 male honey creepers on Trinidad and approximately 12 females. On Tobago, we've banded a significant more of the red-legged honey creepers, and we suspect that these honey creepers are doing a pre-alternate molt. My hypothesis is that they have been triggered by wear and energy, perhaps due to some local migration, or the plumage is energetically consuming after keep producing after every molt, and this suggests that they might be going back to a green plume. Based on my observations as well, it looks like the pre-alternate molt syncs with the breeding season. So if you can see here, these are two honey creepers that were captured at the Acerite Nature Center. One of them has a black mask on already, so he's already fully black in mask. He has black flight feathers, and yellow legs with a green mottled body. So his body is more green in plumage than it is purple, but he does have some purple mottling on his body. Very little, looks like he's about to come into a purple plume or start a molt, which then changes this green into purple. The bird on the left hand side, his mask is not yet completed. He does have some black flight feathers and some purple mottling, but he is not yet, he doesn't yet have on his full black mask. And these are all purple honeycreepers. I didn't mention in this photograph here, the first two photographs shows us purple honeycreepers with some green edging to the base of their feathers. So this was very interesting to see. We were advised that there's technology such as phytochronology that might be able to help us to determine everything that the bird is doing to grow this feather, everything that they're eating to grow this feather, where the feather was grown. And so we're hoping that at some point in time we might be able to get access to a lab that will help us to do phytochronology and other relevant genetic sampling that would help us to determine our hypothesis. Okay, so TTBO wins award to monitor birds. We did win a small grant with the Birds Caribbean team, our working partners, to establish a year-round bird banding station. And this is to help us to monitor migratory species in Trinidad and Tobago. So we were part of a broader network again, and congratulations to all 11 grant awardees and their exciting projects to conserve birds in the Caribbean. I'm really excited and happy to be part of such a phenomenal network with all of these brilliant people. And so TTBO, we do, while we are monitoring birds and we're doing all of this scientific research, we want to make informed or have an informed public. And so we do a series of education and outreach programs and initiatives. First up, we have workshops. We do banding workshops. Our first banding workshop was in February 2024, where we were joined by our partner, Birds Caribbean, through Holly Garrod came to Trinidad. We had a really great banding workshop where we had some locals attend that workshop, and those locals were a mixture of naturalists, conservationists, and academia. We also continue to host festivals, outings, school visits, and banding with the public sessions. So for environmental education, we do banding with the public sessions, and our educational programs are really fundamental to changing how communities engage with birds and biodiversity. So we invite university groups to come to the banding station where they can do a thorough banding with the public session and learn more about our initiatives. We allow local schools to visit the banding station. So we collaborate with local schools on Tobago. This was on Tobago, and we're still working to get that implemented here on Trinidad for having local schools visit our banding station. We do community outings as part of our education and outreach initiatives. So here we have two series of outings that we did with some of the young adults or high school students from the Brasso-Seco community. First, that you're seeing on the left hand side, was a botanical birding trip in Port of Spain, where we went to Faraz Abdul's tapestry exhibition. They got a really good look at Faraz's photographs and learned a lot about the different ecosystems that he visited to capture those photographs and what went into the actual work for those photographs. And then we visited the botanical gardens where we did some botanical birding and talked a bit about that ecosystem and what was found there. And then we went to Tobago. So we took the kids from Brasso-Seco, Trinidad, and we took a trip across to Tobago where we did an ecology assessment. So we went up to the main ridge, we did a trail, and the children did a ecology assessment of the main ridge, where they listed their observations, their threats and solutions, and they also did a marine ecology assessment, where we went onto the Boca Reef and then onto the Nylon Pool, where again they listed their observations, all of the things that were found within that ecosystem and environment, what threats they are facing, and solutions. All of this, they used local knowledge, spoke with fishermen, spoke with people by the beach, spoke with stakeholders and locals, and went ahead and did their poster presentations. So this was really, really a great initiative for us. And of course, workshops, which we discussed earlier on, we do facilitate workshops as well. Brasso Seco Bird Festival is really a combination event of the Caribbean Endemic Bird Festival and the Environment for the Americas World Migratory Bird Day events that occur during those periods. And this combination event really intended to be a bridge between sharing spaces and environmental education. And so we host this, or facilitate this event rather, annually. Every year we are trying to improve and expand on the actual festival and the outreach and the intention. Last year, the theme for last year was Protect Insects, Protect Birds, where we had the children split into two teams, Team Birds and Team Insects. Team Birds would have gone on their own and done their environmental assessments with their team leaders, where they were assigned a particular species and collected data on this species. And Team Insects, the same. They would have collected data on a variety of insects, but particularly bees as a pollinator. And then they did their art projects and graduated as junior entomologists and junior ornithologists. And for this year, the theme this year was Shared Spaces, Creating Bird-Friendly Cities and Communities. Again, we want to bridge that, we want to put the lesson in the activity. And so we decided we would build 3D models of bird-friendly cities and communities, where the children were interactive with what it actually takes to share a space with your natural environment and share spaces with birds and other wildlife. This event also prompted them to make a pledge to help birds, where we have some children even redoing or restructuring and redesigning their backyard gardens to be more friendly to birds and to have a pledge to help birds. So this is just some images from our annual education and outreach event. We have one of our main attendees, Mr. LeSean, here with his poem, his haiku and cinquin poem. Ferdia watching us through his binoculars. And then we have one very beautiful young community member from Brasso Seco, Casion, who is receiving his certificate for that day. The materials that we use here for our banding programs would be the Molt and Neotropical Birds, which is one of our reference guides. We use the Identification Guide to North American Birds by Peter Pyle, the part 1, but the second edition, that helps us with monitoring birds during the moulter season. So for more migratory birds, and our field guide by Kennefic, Birds of Trinidad and Tobago, helps us with species identification in the field. And some more materials that we use would be the Journal of Field Ornithology, and this handbook of bird biology by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So how you can help? You can follow us on social media, volunteer, collaborate, donate, or visit our banding stations. And of course, you can click the QR code, or scan the QR code actually. Visit our Instagram at TTBO Research. Check us out on Facebook, the Trinidad and Tobago Bird Observatory and Research Center. And how you can help. So what's next for TTBO? We're going to be deploying or we want to start deploying motor towers and GPS tracking. So we're working with our partners, the Brits Caribbean team, to try to make this happen soon. We want to do more expansion of workshops and banding stations. So we really need more help and of course more funding to make this happen. We want to get involved in seabird and shorebird monitoring initiatives and have a regional collaboration for Caribbean ornithology. So these are all things that we're looking forward to planning and expanding research capacity and partnerships. And I would really like to say thank you very, very much for having me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present on what we're doing here in Trinidad and Tobago. We hope to some extent that you look forward to getting involved, whether that be through directly donating, following us on social media, checking out our website, or visiting the banding station, and or even getting involved in education and outreach. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your afternoon.